When my parents sold the family cabin, they didn't even tell me. I found out through a Facebook. My name is Melissa Turner, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought that a random scroll through Facebook would completely shatter my world. But there it was, my sister Amber, standing in front of our family cabin, the keys dangling from her fingers, with a caption that knocked the air from my lungs. Our wedding gift from Mom and Dad. That property was supposed to be shared between us. At least that's what my grandfather had always said. Before I could process what was happening, my phone rang. It was my mother, and the conversation that followed would change everything. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who should have loved you most, trust me, what happened next in my story might just give you the courage you need. The first time I ever visited my grandfather's cabin, I was only 6 years old. The memory is still vivid in my mind all these years later. The scent of pine trees surrounding the wooden structure, the crystal clear lake just a short walk down a winding path, and the way the sunlight filtered through the trees to create dancing patterns on the cabin's worn wooden floor. My grandfather, James Turner, had built this cabin with his own hands in the 70s. He was a carpenter by trade with rough, calloused hands that somehow remained gentle when he lifted me onto his shoulders to point out the various birds that visited the feeder he had constructed on the front porch. "One day this place will belong to all of you," he would say, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at me and my younger sister Amber. "This is our family legacy." Those summers at the cabin became the cornerstone of my childhood. While our parents were often too busy with their careers to spend much time with us, my grandfather filled that void. He taught me how to fish in the lake, how to identify different types of trees in the surrounding forest, and most importantly, how to appreciate the simple peace that came with being surrounded by nature. As I grew older, I began to see the cabin as more than just a vacation spot. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the mounting pressure from my parents to follow in their footsteps and pursue a career in medicine or law. Unlike my sister Amber, who eagerly embraced our parents' ambitions and enrolled in pre-med courses, I was drawn to creative pursuits. Photography and writing were my passions, much to my parents' dismay. "You'll never make a decent living with those hobbies," my father would scoff whenever I showed him a photograph I was particularly proud of. Meanwhile, Amber's straight A's and acceptance to prestigious internships were celebrated with expensive dinners and lavish gifts. Despite their disapproval, I continued to pursue my dreams, finding solace in the countless weekends I spent at the cabin. When I turned 20, I made the decision to move into the cabin full-time for a year, much to my parents' horror. My grandfather, however, supported my choice. "Sometimes you need to step away from the noise to hear your own voice," he told me the day I moved in, pressing a set of keys into my palm. "Consider this cabin your home for as long as you need it." That year at the cabin was transformative. I wrote my first book, a collection of personal essays accompanied by photographs I had taken of the surrounding wilderness. To everyone's surprise, especially my parents, the book was picked up by a small publishing house and received modest but respectable critical acclaim. My grandfather was incredibly proud, keeping a copy of my book on his bedside table until the day he died. The memory of him showing it to every visitor who came to see him in the hospital during his final days still brings tears to my eyes. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left a will stating that the cabin should be shared equally between me and Amber. A place where both my granddaughters can find peace and inspiration. The will read, "My parents, as executors of the will, assured us that they would handle the legal transfer of ownership once all the estate matters were settled. I continued to visit the cabin regularly, often spending weeks at a time there while working on my second book. Amber, busy with medical school and her relationship with her fiancé Taylor, rarely found time to visit. Still, I always made sure the guest room was prepared for her, hoping that one day she would rediscover her love for our childhood sanctuary. Last summer, I had noticed some small renovations when I arrived for my usual stay. The kitchen had new appliances, and the master bedroom had been repainted. When I asked my parents about it, they casually mentioned they were updating a few things to maintain the property value. It never occurred to me that they might be preparing to sell it, or worse, give it away to only one of their children. I should have paid more attention to the signs, the strange calls they would take outside when I was visiting their house, the way they would change the subject whenever I brought up long-term plans for the cabin, the realtor's business card I found tucked inside a kitchen drawer that I dismissed as related to their own house, not our family cabin. But nothing prepared me for what I would discover through a simple scroll through my Facebook feed on what began as an ordinary Tuesday morning, completely unaware that my life was about to be turned upside down. The Facebook post felt like a punch to the gut. There was my sister Amber standing proudly in front of our grandfather's cabin keys dangling from her fingers, with her fiancé Taylor's arm wrapped around her waist. The caption read, "Our wedding gift from Mom and Dad, can't believe we now own the family cabin. Had blessed, had newlyweds, had dream come true." The timestamp showed it had been posted 3 hours ago, and it already had over 100 likes and dozens of congratulatory comments. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. Confusion gave way to disbelief, which quickly transformed into a sickening understanding. They had given the cabin to Amber, the cabin that was supposed to be equally shared between us, according to my grandfather's will. The cabin that had been my sanctuary, my inspiration, my connection to the grandfather who had believed in me when no one else did. I tried to calm myself, thinking there had to be some misunderstanding. Perhaps they had only given Amber and Taylor the right to use it for their honeymoon, or maybe they had purchased another similar cabin in the same area. But the more I stared at the photo, the more details I recognized. The handcrafted wind chime my grandfather and I had made together, still hanging from the porch ceiling. The unique pattern of the stonework around the front door. The old wooden bench where I had spent countless hours writing and reading. With my heart pounding, I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice falsely cheerful. "Melissa, what a surprise to hear from you midweek. Is everything okay?" "Mom." I struggled to keep my voice steady. "I just saw Amber's Facebook post about the cabin." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Oh, that. Well, we were going to tell you soon." "Tell me what exactly that you gave away half of my inheritance without even consulting me." "Melissa, don't be dramatic. Your father and I made a decision that was best for everyone. Amber and Taylor are starting their lives together. They need a place to create memories with their future children." "And what about my half of the cabin? Grandfather's will specifically stated it was to be shared between Amber and me." "The will was more of a suggestion, dear. Your father and I were the executors, and we had the final say in how the property was distributed." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you just decided that Amber deserved it more than me?" "Well, let's be realistic, Melissa. What would you do with a property like that? Your lifestyle is so unstable. Taking pictures and writing little stories isn't exactly a career that would allow you to maintain such a valuable asset." Her dismissive tone cut deep. "Those little stories paid for my life for the past 5 years, Mom. And that valuable asset has been my home and workspace. Don't be silly. It was never your permanent home. You just camped out there whenever you wanted to find yourself or whatever it is you claim to do up there." My voice was beginning to shake with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I want to talk to Dad. Put him on the phone." I heard muffled voices. Then my father's gruff voice came on the line. "Melissa, your mother tells me you're upset about the cabin." "Upset, Dad, you gave away property that was legally half mine without even telling me." "Now listen here, young lady. That cabin has been in our family for generations, and we wanted to make sure it stayed in capable hands. Amber and Taylor are responsible adults with real careers. They'll take proper care of the place. And I wouldn't, is that what you're saying?" "Let's face it, Melissa. Your track record with responsibility isn't exactly stellar. Remember that car we helped you buy totaled within 6 months, or the college tuition we paid only for you to drop out and pursue your artistic dreams. We just couldn't risk you turning the cabin into another one of your failed projects." Each word felt like a knife. I had worked so hard to build a life. I was proud of a career doing what I loved, and yet in their eyes, I was still the family disappointment. Dad, I've been published. I've won awards for my photography. I've supported myself entirely for years now. Playing around with a camera and writing stories that nobody reads isn't a real job, Melissa. It's a hobby that you've somehow managed to scrape by on. Amber saves lives. What do you do? The comparison to my sister, always their golden child, was the final straw. I capture beauty and truth. I help people see the world differently. But clearly that means nothing to either of you. Look, my father's voice softened slightly, though the condescension remained. We did what we thought was best. The decision has been made. The papers have been signed. The cabin belongs to Amber and Taylor now. What about my things? I have personal belongings there? Equipment for my work manuscripts? Amber mentioned something about boxes in the guest room. She's having them shipped to your apartment next week. So they had already packed up my life there, treating my possessions like an afterthought. The realization was devastating. I see. And when exactly were you planning to tell me about all this? Or was I just supposed to figure it out when my key stopped working? My mother's voice cut in, having apparently been listening on another phone. Don't be so dramatic, Melissa. We were going to tell you after Amber's wedding. We didn't want to cause a scene before her big day. Of course. Amber's feelings were the priority as always. Mine were an inconvenience, a potential problem to be managed. So what happened to my share? According to grandfather's will, half of that property value belongs to me. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then my mother's laugh, a sound that seemed to dismiss my very existence. You really think you earned anything after all the money we've spent on your failed attempts at finding yourself? I could hear the eye roll in her voice as she continued. Amber's starting a real life. She's going to be a doctor married to a lawyer. They'll have children who will enjoy that cabin. You're just wasting space with your so-called career. My father jumped in, his voice heavy with disappointment that had become all too familiar over the years. What would you even do with it, Melissa? Turn it into one of your little projects and screw it up like everything else you've ever attempted. The cabin deserves better than that. They spoke about me as if I wasn't even on the line discussing my failures and shortcomings, like I was some joke they shared between them. The pain was almost physical, a crushing weight on my chest that made it difficult to breathe. When I finally found my voice, it was surprisingly steady. Got it. Thanks for clearing that up. Melissa, don't be like that. My mother started, but I cut her off. No, really. Message received loud and clear. Congratulations to Amber and Taylor. I hope they enjoy the cabin. I hung up before they could say anything else, before they could hear the sob that escaped my throat the moment the call ended. I sat in my apartment surrounded by photographs of the cabin that had been my sanctuary, my home, my connection to the grandfather who had believed in me and let the tears flow freely. But beneath the hurt, something else was beginning to take shape. A resolve, a determination to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. I wasn't going to just accept this injustice. I wasn't going to play the role of the disappointment they had cast me in. As I wiped away my tears, I reached for my laptop. If they thought I would quietly disappear into the background of the family narrative, as I had so many times before, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. For 3 days after discovering what my parents had done, I barely left my apartment. I alternated between crying until my eyes were swollen and staring numbly at the walls, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Not just the loss of the cabin itself, though, that was devastating, but the realization of how little my parents thought of me and my choices. Every conversation replayed in my mind, each dismissive comment and comparison to Amber taking on new significance. Had they always seen me this way? As a failure, a disappointment, someone unworthy of the inheritance my grandfather had explicitly wanted me to have. On the 4th day, I woke up with a clarity that had been absent in the fog of grief. I needed to take action, not just for the cabin, but for myself, for the little girl who had always sought her parents' approval and never quite received it. My first call was to a lawyer, Sarah Goldstein, who specialized in estate law. I explained the situation, including the details of my grandfather's will and how my parents as executors had ignored his wishes. They can't just do that. I insisted, my voice still raw from days of crying. The will clearly stated the cabin was to be shared between Amber and me. Sarah's voice was calm, but concerned. If the will was properly executed and had clear instructions, then no, they shouldn't be able to simply ignore those wishes. Do you have a copy of the will? I didn't, but I knew who might. My grandfather's oldest friend, Martin Reeves, had been a witness to the signing of the will. A quick call confirmed that he not only remembered the will's contents, but had kept a copy just in case something like this happened. Your grandfather was worried, Martin told me over coffee the next day, sliding a manila envelope across the table. He loved your parents, but he knew how they favored Amber. He made me promise to keep this copy safe. Inside was not only a copy of the will with its clear instruction that the cabin be shared equally between Amber and me, but also a handwritten letter from my grandfather to me. Dear Melissa, it read, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong with my final wishes. I've always seen a special spark in you, a creativity and passion that reminds me of myself in my younger days. The cabin was where I found my peace, and I've watched it become the same for you. It is as much yours as it is Amber's, regardless of what anyone else might say. Fight for what is rightfully yours, little one. I believe in you. Always have, always will. Love, Grandpa. Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter and carefully placed it back in the envelope. With renewed determination, I returned to Sarah's office the next day with the will copy and a fire in my heart. This is definitely grounds for a challenge, she confirmed after reviewing the documents. But I should warn you, family legal battles can be messy and emotionally draining. Are you sure you want to proceed? I thought about the cabin, about the peaceful mornings watching mist rise off the lake, about the evenings spent by the fireplace my grandfather had built with his own hands, about the book I had written within those walls that had launched my career. But most of all, I thought about my grandfather's belief in me, so different from my parents' constant disappointment. I'm sure, I said firmly. What's our next step? Sarah explained that we would first send a formal letter to my parents, outlining the legal issues with their actions, and requesting a meeting to discuss a fair resolution. If they refused, we would file a petition with the probate court to enforce the terms of my grandfather's will. One more thing, Sarah added as I was leaving. Given what you've told me about your parents' dismissive attitude toward your career, it might be helpful to demonstrate your financial stability and success. Can you put together a portfolio of your work along with financial statements, showing your income from your books and photography? I spent the next week compiling exactly that evidence of my little projects that my father had so casually dismissed. My published books, the photography exhibitions that had sold out, the steady income that had allowed me to support myself comfortably for years, the savings account that held more money than my parents probably realized I had ever earned. While working on this, I received a large box from a shipping company. Inside were my belongings from the cabin hastily packed and carelessly thrown together. A framed photograph of me and my grandfather was cracked. My vintage typewriter had keys that were now jammed. Worst of all, the manuscript for my upcoming book had pages missing and coffee stains on several chapters. I documented everything with photographs, adding it to the growing file of evidence that Sarah was building. She sent the formal letter to my parents the following Monday, requesting a response within 10 business days. Their reply came not through their lawyer as Sarah had expected, but in the form of my mother showing up unannounced at my apartment door. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, waving the letter in my face as she pushed past me into my living room. "Standing up for myself," I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. "And for what grandfather wanted." "This is ridiculous, Melissa. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? How it will affect Amber? She's heartbroken that you would try to ruin her wedding gift." "This isn't about Amber. It's about respecting grandfather's wishes and my right to what he wanted me to have." My mother paced the room, her gaze falling on the framed reviews of my latest book that hung on the wall. For a moment, something like surprise flashed across her face, before she masked it with her usual disapproval. "Your father and I have always wanted what's best for you. Why can't you see that? This constant rebellion, these artistic pursuits that lead nowhere, and now this legal nonsense. When will you grow up and start living in the real world? This is the real world, Mom. I gestured around my apartment to the evidence of my success that she seemed determined not to see. I've built a life doing what I love, what I'm good at. I'm successful by any reasonable measure. The only people who can't see that are you and Dad. Successful, she scoffed. Playing with cameras and writing stories isn't success, Melissa. It's extended childhood. Amber is successful. She saves lives. She has a real career. And that's wonderful for her. I'm happy that she's found fulfillment in medicine. But that doesn't make my path any less valid or worthy of respect. My mother's expression hardened. We're not giving you half the cabin if that's what you're hoping for with this legal stunt. The papers are signed. It belongs to Amber and Taylor now. Then I'll see you in court, I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. Please leave now. Any further communication should go through my lawyer. After she left, I sat down on my couch trembling, but also feeling a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time in my life, I had stood my ground with my mother without backing down or doubting myself. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. The next day, I received a call from Amber. Unlike our mother, her voice was tearful rather than angry. How could you do this, Melissa? You're ruining everything. Taylor and I had plans for the cabin. We were going to renovate the kitchen and turn one of the bedrooms into a nursery. Amber, I'm not trying to take the cabin away from you. I just want what Grandfather intended for both of us to share it. But we need it more than you do. We're starting a family. You're just doing whatever it is you do. The familiar dismissal of my life and choices stung even coming from my sister. What I do is build a life that makes me happy and honors the gifts Grandfather saw in me. And part of that includes the cabin he specifically wanted me to share with you. You've always been so selfish, Amber sniffed, always wanting everything your way, never considering what other people need. The irony of her statement might have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. I've spent my entire life trying to earn approval that never came Amber. I'm done apologizing for who I am and what I want. If you and Taylor want to discuss a fair arrangement for sharing the cabin, I'm open to that conversation. Otherwise, I'll see you at the hearing. 2 days later, I received a text from my father. Your mother is upset. Amber is crying every day. Is this really worth tearing the family apart over? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. The family was already torn apart when you decided one daughter deserved everything and the other nothing. I'm just trying to repair what you broke. He didn't reply. As the court date approached, I continued building my case with Sarah. We gathered statements from family friends who had heard my grandfather speak about his wishes for the cabin. We compiled financial records showing I was more than capable of maintaining my share of the property. We even found photographs of improvements I had made to the cabin over the years, demonstrating my commitment to preserving and enhancing our family legacy. Through it all, I kept my grandfather's letter close, reading it whenever doubt began to creep in. Fight for what is rightfully yours, little one. And that's exactly what I intended to do. The weeks leading up to the court hearing were filled with tension and unexpected discoveries. My lawyer, Sarah, had advised me to gather as much documentation as possible related to the cabin and my grandfather's estate. This led me to visit my childhood home when my parents were out using the key they had never asked me to return. In the attic, buried under boxes of Christmas decorations, I found a treasure trove of family history. Old photographs of my grandfather building the cabin. Letters he had written to my grandmother during that time, expressing his dreams for the property. And most significantly, a journal he had kept during his final years. I sat cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, carefully turning the pages of my grandfather's journal, my heart pounding as I read his private thoughts. Many entries mentioned me specifically. Spent the day at the cabin with Melissa, one read. That girl has her grandmother's eye for beauty. Watched her photograph the sunrise over the lake for hours, so patient, so focused. Reminds me of myself at that age, seeing magic where others see only trees and water. Another entry dated just weeks before his death cut straight to my heart. Had a troubling conversation with Edward and Diana today. They don't understand Melissa's path can only see what she isn't rather than what she is. Tried to make them see her strength, her talent, her determination. Fear they never will. Must ensure the cabin remains hers as much as Amber's. It's where she found herself when they couldn't see her worth. Tears streamed down my face as I carefully photographed these pages. My grandfather had not only believed in me, he had tried to advocate for me with my parents, even as his health failed. When I shared these findings with Sarah, her eyes lit up. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "Direct evidence of your grandfather's intentions and his awareness of potential issues with your parents as executors." Meanwhile, my parents launched a counteroffensive. Suddenly, family friends were calling me, urging me to drop the lawsuit. "Family is more important than property," they would say, clearly reciting talking points my mother had provided. My father attempted a different approach, offering a financial settlement instead of partial ownership of the cabin. "We'll buy out your share," he proposed during a tense phone call. "Then you can use the money for whatever projects you want to pursue." "It's not about the money," I told him firmly. "It's about honoring grandfather's wishes. It's about my connection to that place." "Don't be sentimental, Melissa. It's just a building." "If it's just a building, why did you give it to Amber instead of selling it and splitting the proceeds? Why did you make it her wedding gift if it has no sentimental value?" He had no answer for that. As the hearing date grew closer, my parents' tactics became more desperate. My mother began showing up at my photography exhibitions, loudly commenting on how quaint and amateur my work was to anyone who would listen. My father contacted the publisher of my upcoming book, introducing himself as the father of the author and asking pointed questions about my advance and sales projections. But the most painful blow came from Amber. She called me late one night, her voice slurred from what I assumed was several glasses of wine. "You know what, Melissa? I've always been jealous of you," she said, catching me completely off guard. "Jealous of me, but you were always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong." She laughed bitterly. "Golden child with golden handcuffs. Do you have any idea what it's like living up to their expectations every single day? I never wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to study marine biology. But that wasn't prestigious enough for Mom and Dad." I sat down, stunned by this revelation. "Amber, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't. You were too busy being the rebel, doing exactly what you wanted. You have no idea what real pressure feels like." "That's not fair," I protested. "I've faced plenty of pressure and disappointment." "Please," she scoffed. "You gotta be the creative one, the free spirit. I had to be perfect, and now you want to take away the one thing they've given me that's just for me." "The cabin was meant for both of us, Amber, and if you're so unhappy with your choices, that's not my fault." "You know what?" Her voice hardened. "Keep fighting for your precious cabin. But know that if you win, you're destroying my marriage before it even begins. Taylor's parents already think I come from a dysfunctional family. This lawsuit proves them right." She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, a new weight of guilt added to my already heavy emotional burden. Was I being selfish? Was fighting for what was rightfully mine worth, potentially damaging my sister's new marriage? I called Sarah the next morning, explaining Amber's call and my doubts. "This is a classic manipulation tactic," she assured me. "They're trying to make you feel responsible for family harmony, when they're the ones who created this conflict by ignoring your grandfather's wishes. Stay the course, Melissa. We have a strong case." 2 days before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. Taylor Amber's fiancé stood awkwardly at my door, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "Can we talk?" he asked, not as adversaries, but as family. Over coffee at my kitchen table, Taylor revealed something that changed everything. "Amber and I never asked for the cabin as a wedding gift. We were as surprised as you probably were when your parents presented us with the deed." "What?" I nearly spilled my coffee. "But Amber's Facebook post." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Your mother suggested the wording, said it would simplify the narrative. We didn't know about the will specifying equal shares, Melissa. We thought your parents owned the cabin outright and could do whatever they wanted with it." "And now that you know," Taylor sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Honestly, This whole situation makes me uncomfortable. I come from a family where transparency and fairness are valued. The way your parents have handled this. He trailed off. Let's just say it's raised some concerns for me about our future family dynamics. What are you saying, Taylor? I'm saying that Amber and I would be open to discussing a compromise, joint ownership perhaps, or a schedule that allows both families to enjoy the property, something fair that honors your grandfather's wishes. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Does Amber know you're here? He nodded. It was her idea, actually. That call she made to you. She was horrified the next morning when she remembered what she'd said. She's been stressed about the wedding, about her residency, about everything really. But she doesn't want to lose her sister over this. I blinked back tears. I don't want to lose her either. We spent the next hour drafting a proposal for joint ownership and usage rights that seemed fair to both parties. Taylor took the draft with him, promising to discuss it with Amber, and then approach my parents. They might not be receptive, I warned him. This has become about more than just the cabin for them. Let me worry about that, he said with surprising determination. I can be very persuasive when necessary. The morning of the court hearing arrived. I dressed carefully in a professional but understated outfit, gathered my documentation, and met Sarah at her office. She reviewed our strategy one final time before we headed to the courthouse. Whatever happens today, she told me as we walked up the steps, you've already won by standing up for yourself. That takes courage. In the corridor outside the courtroom, we found my parents huddled with their lawyer. My mother's face was set in a stony expression, while my father looked merely tired. Amber and Taylor stood slightly apart, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. As the bailiff announced our case, Taylor suddenly broke away from Amber and approached my parents' lawyer, whispering something urgent. The lawyer frowned, then pulled my parents aside. An animated conversation ensued, with Taylor showing them something on his phone that caused my mother's face to pale. Their lawyer approached Sarah. We'd like to request a brief recess before proceedings begin. My clients are interested in discussing a potential settlement. Sarah looked at me questioningly. I nodded. In a small conference room with lawyers present, my father cleared his throat. It has come to our attention that there may have been some misunderstanding regarding the terms of your grandfather's will. My mother jumped in, her voice overly pleasant. We've reconsidered our position and believe a compromise might be in everyone's best interest. What kind of compromise? I asked cautiously. Taylor stepped forward, presenting the very proposal we had drafted together. Joint ownership, equal rights to usage with a schedule we all agree upon. Shared responsibility for maintenance and improvements. My father looked like he had swallowed something sour, but he nodded. We find these terms acceptable. May I ask what brought about this sudden change of heart? Sarah inquired, her skepticism evident. Taylor and Amber exchanged a look before Amber spoke. Let's just say we discovered some additional documentation that clarified Grandpa's intentions beyond any doubt. Later in private, Taylor explained. He had used his legal training to dig deeper into my grandfather's estate planning and discovered a letter of instruction my grandfather had left with his original lawyer, a letter my parents had apparently suppressed. In it, he explicitly stated his concerns that my parents might try to disinherit me from the cabin, and included a legal clause that would invalidate any attempt to transfer sole ownership to just one granddaughter. If I had presented that letter in court, Taylor explained, your parents could have faced serious legal consequences for their actions as executors. I didn't want to go that far, but they needed to understand the gravity of what they'd done. The settlement was formalized over the next week. The cabin would be jointly owned by Amber and me, with a clear schedule allowing each of us ample time throughout the year. Major decisions about the property would require mutual agreement, and costs would be shared equally. As we signed the final papers, my mother pulled me aside. I hope you're satisfied, she said, her voice still holding an edge of resentment. This isn't about satisfaction, Mom. It's about justice, about honoring Grandfather's wishes. He always did favor you, she muttered. Saw himself in you, I suppose. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about my mother that I had never grasped before. Her dismissal of my choices, Her apparent favoritism toward Amber stemmed not from disappointment, but from something deeper, a resentment of the bond I had shared with her father, a bond she herself had never experienced. "This doesn't have to be the end of our relationship," I said quietly. "We could try to understand each other better." She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her immaculate blazer. "Perhaps, in time." It wasn't much, but it was more than I had expected. My father was more direct in his approach. "I still think you're making a mistake with this photography business," he said as we left the lawyer's office. "But your grandfather believed in you. Maybe there's something to it that I don't see." Coming from him, it was practically an apology. Amber hugged me tightly before leaving with Taylor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. We'll make this work, I promise. The cabin should bring our families together, not tear us apart." I returned to my apartment that evening, feeling drained but vindicated. On my desk sat my grandfather's journal, which I had kept after finding it in the attic. I opened it to the final entry written just days before his death. "My greatest hope," he had written in shaky handwriting, "is that long after I'm gone, the cabin will stand as a reminder to my granddaughters of what matters most in life. Not success as others define it, but the courage to be true to yourself and the strength to stand up for what is right. Melissa already understands this. Perhaps someday Amber will too." I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. "I fought for what was rightfully mine, just like you believed I could." 2 months after the settlement, I took one decisive step that completely changed the trajectory of our family dynamics. It wasn't planned as revenge or retaliation. It was simply the natural culmination of events and realizations that had been building since the cabin dispute began. My third book, which had been in progress when the cabin drama unfolded, took an unexpected turn. What had begun as a collection of nature photographs and reflections transformed into something more personal and powerful. With my publisher's enthusiastic support, I shifted the focus to explore family legacy's inherited values and the courage required to chart one's own path. The centerpiece of the book became the story of my grandfather, the cabin he built with his own hands, and the battle to honor his wishes after his death. I changed names and certain identifying details out of respect for privacy, but the emotional truth of the experience remained intact. I hadn't told my family about this new direction. The first they learned of it was when my publisher issued a press release announcing the upcoming book titled "Inherited Fighting for Legacy in a Family That Never Saw My Worth." The release included an excerpt that detailed the moment I discovered my parents had given away my inheritance through a Facebook post. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone exploded with notifications. Friends expressed support. Literary critics who had received advance copies praised the book's unflinching honesty and emotional depth. Several major media outlets requested interviews. And then came the calls from my family. My mother's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "How dare you air our private business for the world to see? Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" I changed the names, Mom. "No one who doesn't already know our story would identify you." "That's not the point. People we know will read this and immediately recognize us. Your father is devastated. His colleagues at the firm have already been asking questions." "I'm sorry you're uncomfortable with my telling my own story," I replied calmly. "But everything in the book is true, and it's my truth to tell. We're your parents. Don't we deserve some loyalty, some privacy? Didn't I deserve the same when you dismissed my career and gave away my inheritance without even telling me?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father's call came later that evening, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. "Melissa, I've been thinking a lot about our relationship since this cabin business. Reading that excerpt, seeing our actions through your eyes, it wasn't comfortable." I waited unsure where he was heading with this. "I always thought we were pushing you because we wanted the best for you. Security, stability, respect. The things I worked my whole life to achieve." He sighed heavily. "It never occurred to me that in pursuing what I thought was best, I was dismissing what actually made you happy. Dad, Please let me finish. I'm not saying I suddenly understand or approve of all your choices, but I'm trying to see that they are your choices to make. And perhaps they haven't been as foolish as I assumed. It wasn't an apology exactly, but from my father, it was unprecedented acknowledgement. Amber's reaction surprised me the most. She showed up at my apartment the day after the press release, a copy of the excerpt clutched in her hand. Is this really how you see us? How you see me? She asked, her voice small. It's how I experienced it, Amber. My perspective, my feelings. She nodded slowly, sinking onto my couch. I never realized. I knew Mom and Dad were harder on you, but I didn't understand the extent of it. Reading this made me see our entire childhood differently. We talked for hours that day, truly talked, perhaps for the first time as adults. Amber confessed her own struggles with our parents' expectations, the golden cage of being the successful daughter. I shared my feelings of inadequacy and invisibility that had persisted despite my professional achievements. I'm proud of you, she said as she was leaving, for the book, for standing up to them, for all of it. And I'm sorry I didn't stand with you sooner. The book was published 3 weeks later and immediately hit the bestseller lists. Reviews praised its raw honesty and universal themes of family identity and self-worth. Interviews led to speaking engagements. Speaking engagements led to a documentary filmmaker expressing interest in adapting the story. And then came the voicemails. The first one arrived on a Tuesday morning, my mother's voice strained with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Melissa, please call us back. We've been trying to reach you for days. I hadn't been deliberately ignoring them, but the book launch had been all-consuming, filling my days with interviews and appearances. The second voicemail came that evening, my father this time. Melissa, we saw your interview on the morning show. You were very articulate. Please call when you can. By the end of the week, the messages had taken on a distinctly pleading tone. Melissa, please talk to us. We didn't mean it like that. We're proud of your success. We've always been proud. Your book it's opened our eyes. Please give us a chance to make things right. We miss you, sweetheart. The family isn't complete without you. I listened to each message, noting the increasingly desperate tone, the gradual shift from defensiveness to something that almost sounded like genuine remorse. Part of me was satisfied by this reversal, this evidence that I had finally made them see me. Another part remained wary, wondering if this was just another manipulation. The final message came on a Sunday evening, my mother's voice tearful in a way I had rarely heard. Melissa, we were wrong about everything, about you, about your work, about what your grandfather wanted. We were so focused on our own vision of success that we couldn't see yours even when it was right in front of us. Please give us a chance to apologize properly, to start again. I sat in my apartment, the phone heavy in my hand, considering my options. The book had been cathartic, transforming my private pain into something meaningful that resonated with others. But was I ready to transform my relationship with my parents? Could years of dismissal and disappointment be overcome? My gaze fell on my grandfather's journal sitting on my coffee table, where I had placed it after finding it in the attic. I opened it to a page I had read countless times over the past months. Forgiveness, he had written, is not about forgetting the hurt or pretending it never happened. It's about choosing to no longer let that hurt determine your future. It's freedom not for the one who caused the pain, but for yourself. With those words echoing in my mind, I picked up my phone and dialed my parents' number. Hello? My mother answered on the first ring, her voice cautious, hopeful. Hi, Mom, I said quietly. I got your messages. All of them. I think maybe it's time we talked. Really talked. Oh, Melissa, her voice broke. We would like that more than anything. I can't promise that everything will be instantly fixed, I warned. There's a lot of history between us. We know. My father's voice came on the line, they must have been on speaker. But we'd like the chance to try, to understand, to do better. We arranged to meet for dinner the following evening at a neutral location, a restaurant halfway between our homes. As I hung up, I felt a peculiar mixture of apprehension and hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Years of hurt and misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single conversation, or even several. But for the first time, it felt possible that we might build something new from the ruins of what had been broken. Not perfect, perhaps, but authentic. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than unmet expectations. I glanced at the framed photograph on my wall, a sunset over my grandfather's cabin, the light catching on the water of the lake, in a way that transformed the ordinary into something magical. In a few weeks, I would return there for my scheduled time, perhaps to begin work on my next book. But this time, I would carry with me not just the legacy of my grandfather's belief in me, but also the knowledge of my own strength. The cabin had been worth fighting for, not just as property, but as a symbol of standing up for myself and demanding the respect I deserved. Sometimes I reflected the greatest inheritances aren't the things we're given, but the truths we discover about ourselves when those things are threatened. And by that measure, I had inherited far more than just half a cabin by a lake. I had inherited my own voice finally loud enough to be heard. When I arrived at the restaurant to meet my parents, I was surprised to find not only them, but also Amber and Taylor waiting at the table. My sister gave me a small, encouraging smile as I approached, while my parents looked uncharacteristically nervous. "We hope you don't mind," my mother said as I sat down. "We thought it might be good to have everyone together, a fresh start for the whole family." It was the first of many family dinners over the coming months, each one gradually more comfortable than the last. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. My father occasionally slipped into dismissive comments about my unusual career, only to catch himself and make visible efforts to show interest instead. My mother struggled to stop comparing me to Amber, though I noticed her beginning to celebrate our differences, rather than using them as evidence of my shortcomings. For my part, I worked on letting go of the defensive posture I had maintained for so long, the expectation of disapproval that had colored all our interactions. The cabin, once the source of our conflict, became neutral ground for healing. We established a tradition of spending certain holidays there together as a family. During these gatherings, I noticed subtle but meaningful changes. My parents asking thoughtful questions about my latest projects. Amber and I rediscovering the closeness we had shared as children. Even Taylor finding his place in our complicated family dynamic, often serving as a diplomatic bridge when old tensions threatened to resurface. My career continued to flourish. Inherited remained on the bestseller list for months, eventually being translated into 12 languages. The documentary based on my story won awards at several film festivals. Ironically, the conflict that had nearly destroyed our family had launched me to a level of success that even my parents couldn't dismiss. I have to admit, my father said during one cabin weekend as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I never imagined you could make such a success of yourself with writing and photography." "I know, Dad," I replied without bitterness. "You wanted security for me. I understand that better now." Security, yes, but I was wrong about how to achieve it. He gestured toward the stack of international editions of my book that I had brought to show them. "You found your own path to success, one I couldn't see because it wasn't familiar to me." My mother, overhearing this exchange as she brought out coffee, added her own reflection. "Your grandfather would be so proud, Melissa. Not just of your success, but of how you fought for what was rightfully yours." "He'd be proud of all of us," I suggested, for finding our way back to being a family. 1 year after the settlement, I received an unexpected package at my apartment. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden box with an inlaid design of the cabin. The note attached read, "For your birthday, we had this made from one of the original beams Grandpa used when building the cabin. It needed to be replaced during renovations, but we thought you might like to have a piece of the original structure, something tangible to remind you of your connection to that place and to him. Love, Amber and Taylor." Inside the box was another note, this one in my father's handwriting. "Melissa, Your mother and I want to add that we've had your grandfather's will officially amended with the help of our lawyer. The cabin is now legally registered as joint property between you and Amber exactly as he intended. We were wrong to interfere with his wishes and with your rightful inheritance. We know this doesn't undo the hurt we caused, but we hope it's another step toward making things right. Love, Mom and Dad. I traced the outline of the cabin carved into the box lid, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The past hurt the present, healing the future possibility. My grandfather had built that cabin as a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world fell away, and what mattered most came into focus. In fighting for my share of it, I had ultimately created something similar within myself, a place of strength and self-acceptance that no one could take away. When people ask me now about the story behind my most successful book, I tell them it's about inheritance, but not the kind most people imagine. It's about inheriting not just property or possessions, but values, strength, and the courage to stand up for yourself. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most valuable legacies are the ones we claim for ourselves. The cabin remains a special place for me, a touchstone I return to when life becomes overwhelming or when I need inspiration for my work. But I no longer depend on it for my sense of worth or belonging. That I've learned comes from within the unshakable knowledge of who I am and what I value, regardless of others' opinions or approval. Sometimes when I sit on the porch watching the sunrise over the lake, I imagine my grandfather beside me, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug, his eyes crinkling with pride. "I knew you had it in you, little one," I can almost hear him say. "I always did." And in those moments, I know with absolute certainty that the true inheritance he left me was never just the cabin itself, but the belief that I was worthy of fighting for what was mine. A belief that in time taught me to see my own worth through eyes unclouded by others' expectations. Have you ever felt that moment when something inside you shifts and suddenly you see your entire life differently? That's what happened to me in the aftermath of the cabin conflict and my book's success. The change wasn't just in my relationship with my family, but in how I viewed myself and my place in the world. Before the Facebook post that revealed my parents' betrayal, I had spent years seeking their approval, while simultaneously resenting their inability to see my worth. It was an exhausting contradiction that had shaped much of my adult life. The painful confrontation forced me to recognize that I had been living in a state of emotional suspension, always waiting for validation that might never come. The 18 months following the publication of Inherited were transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The book's success opened doors professionally, but more importantly, it connected me with thousands of readers who shared similar experiences. My inbox filled with messages from people who had fought their own battles for recognition and respect within their families. "Your words gave me courage to finally stand up for myself," one reader wrote. "For the first time, I feel seen." These connections inspired me to establish the Legacy Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing resources and support for artists from unsupportive family backgrounds. We offered grants, mentorship programs, and community events, all designed to help creative individuals build confidence in careers, despite lack of family support. My grandfather would have loved this work. In a way, it was an extension of what he had tried to do for me, providing not just material support through the cabin, but the emotional foundation to believe in my own path. As for my family, our healing journey continued, sometimes stumbling over old hurts, other times making surprising progress. My mother joined me for several book tour events, initially sitting quietly in the back, but eventually participating in panel discussions about family dynamics and personal growth. My father, though less publicly involved, made his own efforts once surprising me, with a professionally framed collection of my earliest photographs that he had apparently kept all these years. "I always knew you had talent," he admitted when I expressed shock at this revelation. "I just didn't know how to support something I didn't understand." Amber and Taylor welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Jamie after our grandfather. The first time they brought her to the cabin, we took a family photograph on the porch, the four of them, my parents and me. It sits now on my desk, next to the wooden box made from the cabin beam, and a copy of my grandfather's journal. My most recent visit to the cabin coincided with what would have been my grandfather's 90th birthday. I spent the morning by the lake reflecting on everything that had happened since his passing. As the sun rose over the water, creating that magical light he had loved so much, I found myself writing him a letter in my journal. Dear Grandpa, today, I understand what you tried to teach me in ways I couldn't have imagined when you were here. You saw something in me that took me years to fully recognize in myself, not just creativity or talent, but resilience, the strength to stand alone when necessary, the courage to fight for what matters. When I found your journal and read your words of belief in me, it was like finding a map when I was lost in the darkest woods. You knew my parents might try to take away my inheritance, but you also knew I had it in me to fight back. Perhaps that confidence was your greatest gift to me, greater than the cabin itself. The family is healing now in ways that sometimes surprise me. Mom actually asked me to teach her photography basics last month. Dad sent me an article about a successful photographer without a single disparaging comment. Amber and I share the cabin with genuine joy, creating new memories alongside the ones you left us. But the most important change is inside me. I no longer measure my worth through their eyes or anyone else's. I know who I am, what I value, what I contribute to the world. That certainty is unshakable now, a foundation as solid as the one you built for this cabin. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't yet believe in myself, for seeing what was possible when others saw only what wasn't. I carry your legacy not just in the books I write or the photographs I take, but in the strength I found when it mattered most. With endless love and gratitude, Melissa. As I closed my journal, a sense of peace settled over me, deep and enduring. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. Family dynamics are never completely resolved, only continuously renegotiated. But I had found a place of genuine self-acceptance that no one could take away. My phone buzzed with a text message from my literary agent. Great news inherited just hit 1 million copies sold worldwide. Congratulations. I smiled, imagining what my parents would say when I shared this milestone at our next family dinner. My father would probably ask about the financial details now with genuine interest rather than skepticism. My mother would suggest a celebration perhaps here at the cabin. Amber would toast my success with sincere pride, the competitiveness that once defined our relationship gradually fading. And somewhere, I like to think my grandfather was smiling too. As I prepare to leave the cabin tomorrow, returning to the busy schedule of speaking engagements and foundation work that now fills my calendar, I feel a profound gratitude for this place and everything it represents. Not just the physical structure with its creaking floorboards and magnificent views, but the journey it set me on. A journey not just to claim my inheritance, but to discover my own voice and worth. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Did standing up for yourself change how you saw your own strength? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and self-discovery. Share this with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth today. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your legacy isn't just what's given to you, but what you choose to claim for yourself.